All right, we'll say good morning. Let's begin. So today's daf is Yud Ches. 18. We are beginning on the bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. So we'll say yesterday we began the riveting sugya of Zman Gittin, of why the obligation to go ahead and write a date in the get with the machlokes in Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan said mishum basachoso, because again, without a date, one could technically speaking cover up for adultery committed by one's wife. Reish Lakish says because of peros, that the husband shouldn't abuse his rights in the wife's property. So the Gemara brought a number of nafkamina cases with that, but let's pick up last line of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. So Ravina said to Rava, what about the following case? Kasve va'osve b'kiste. So this is actually an interesting case. So the man ran ahead and wrote a get, but then he put the get in his pocket. So what's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi, top of Yud Ches Amud Aleph, 18a. So va'osve b'kiste yomim rabim. He went ahead and he put it in his pocket for a number of days. Why? Rashi says, "Bahadei biktatos benehem tefayis, v'lo yigarshenu, v'lo afaisa v'girsha, u'michi mate git le'edod gashlos." Listen to this case. So Reuven and Leah are having marital problems. So Reuven happens to have a free day on Sunday. So he figures, you know what? I don't know where this is going to end up. Let me go to the sofa now. Write the get. I'm not going to use it. I'll keep it in my back pocket. But we'll see we'll see if we can work this out. But if we can't work this out, at least I have the get already prepared. So what happens? So he writes the get today, and they're working on their marriage. I'm not suggesting this, by the way, as a way of working on a marriage. This is not a good idea. But the idea, so they're for now 2 months go by. They can't work out their marital issues. So he gives her the get. What's the problem? What's the problem in this situation? Is Lamaisa again, remember the get was dated, and I will say in this case over here, remember, when we were discussing issues of dating the get, so the issues came up with when the ksiva is on one day, and the chasima is on another day, because it's the chasima, it's the signing, that ultimately goes ahead and validates the get. In this case over here, the chasima and the ksiva are being done on the same day. The issue over here is that at the end of the day, the get's not being given until sometime later on. So the Gemara says, so what do you do about this case? Meaning, how does the issue of Zman come into this case over here? To which the Gemara says, we don't worry about this case for a simple reason. Amar leilo makdim inish parnusal anafshe. We'll say a person does not go ahead and bring about difficult or detrimental matters proactively upon himself. In other words, this is another way of saying, people don't do this. People write a get when they have to write a get. People don't write a get when they're in the midst of working out their marriage so that they have it now to be able to use it later. So because it's an uncommon case, therefore Chazal did not extend their legislation to it. So essentially the Gemara deflects the question by simply saying people don't do this. Rashi says, Lo makdim, lo reginu le'me'avid hachi. People don't do this. La'anuche bikiste, to go ahead and keep a get in their pocket. D'chevon de lo nechale begerishin. Because since a person doesn't really want to get divorced, the person is working on their marriage, paronos ulagabe, that ultimately, again, this is a paronos, this is not a good thing, velo makdimle, and a person won't do it. Also, you understand, what the Gemara is also driving at here is another reason why people don't do it, because if a person is going to work on their marriage, they have to be vested in their marriage. If they have a get, can you imagine, like a person walks into therapy and he's got the get in his jacket pocket, just whatever, it's like insurance, just in case this doesn't work out, a person is not vested in that process. That's also, if the guy's going to get divorced, he's going to get divorced. If he's working on his marriage, then it doesn't make sense for him to be carrying around the get. Gittin, actually Howard asked this question yesterday to me after the shir. So Gittin haban mimedina sayam demichteve benisan velo matu atishrei mahu ilu chacham bektakanasan. But I'll say, so what about a simpler case? We don't have to get into any crazy cases. A get comes from overseas. Both if a get comes from overseas, it could be months from the time that the get ultimately leaves the rishus of the Baal till ultimately it leaves the Isha. So literally he says it was written in Nisan and it doesn't arrive until Tishrei. So Rabbosai, in that case again, Maho ilu chachamim betakanasan. So Rabbosai, in that case over there, Again, remember, whether you want to say that Zman is because of Peros, or Zman is because of Shami Chapa, Basa Choso, Shabbos say, again, let's say the get is dated in Nisan, but so remember, again, she commits adultery in Sivan. She's still a married woman until the get reaches her, but Lamais, again, at the end of the day, what? At the end of the day, the date on the get is in Nisan. So Lamais, again, how have the Chachamim accomplished anything through this Zman? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you, Amrlei, Hano Kala Islu. They will say, Gittin that come from overseas have a kol, meaning it's public. People know about this, and therefore what Rashi says, Kala Islu, Ubein le'inyan znus, Ubein le'inyan peros, Bayila suye raya, Emas mata gital yada. Shabbos, when it comes to overseas Gittin, if some matter of machlokis or contention comes up, whether it's about adultery or whether it's about peros, the Beis Din is going to require eidos from the witnesses about when the get was actually delivered. So in this case over here, overseas Gittin, the Gemara says have a kol, there's a publicity about them, and therefore again, if certain issues come up, the Beis Din will require clarification as to when the get was actually handed over. Itmar, me'ema seimon the get. But another interesting sugya, from when we saw this in Ksuvas, from what point in time do we begin to count from a get? Rashi says, Gimel Shchadashim, Sha'isha Tzricha L'hamtina. Also, we have a concept of Havchana. Havchana means that after a woman is divorced or widowed, she must wait 3 months before remarrying. And the logic behind that is paternity. In the event that she's pregnant from her first marriage, we want to know the paternity of the child, who the father of the child is. Because if she gets married right after she gets divorced, you could have this level of ambiguity. Chazal said 3 months, because at 3 months, again, it's hukar ubra. And generally, again, a woman shows. So we could see if she's pregnant or not. We'll be able to know who the father of the child is. So at what point in time do we begin to count the 3 months? Just you should know also, we saw this in Ksuvis, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins and Even Ezer, this is a concept of low plug. Low plug means this applies in all cases. So this would apply, by the way, if a 90-year-old woman is divorced and she wants to remarry, we would still make her wait 3 months. Which Rabbi say is true in all cases of this is true in all cases of halacha. Halacha always creates a low plug, almost always creates a situation where we do not distinguish between one case and the next. The halacha is applied in an objective sense. So when do we begin to count the 3 months? Rav Amar Mishas Nesina. Rav says from the time that the get is given. Ushmuel Omer Mishas Ksiva. And Shmuel says from the time that the get is written. So Maskifla Rav Nasan Bar Ushia l'Shmuel. So Nasan Bar Ushia asked the Kashan Shmuel Yomru Shtei Nashim B'Chatzer Achas. So you could have the following situation of two women in the same chatzer. In other words, let's say a man is married to 2 women, and what happens? And he goes ahead and he divorces them both. Zu Asura v'Zu Muteres. One will be Asra, one will be Mutter. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Beis nashim b'chatzer achas, sha'adam echad, shepirish le'masr shnei gin, l'shtei nashiv bo bayom. Ela shazeh kadam lazeh b'ksivasa chodesh. U'l'shmuel zu tinasi l'sof beis chadashim, v'zu l'sof gimel, yismo b'nei adam shor shnes kashi b'yom echad. So we'll say, so Rav Oshia raises the following kasha on Shmuel. Let's say the following situation. Reuven's married to 2 women. Reuven's going overseas, or whatever, it doesn't matter why. He's divorcing both of his wives. It just happens to be that for one of them, he had the get written a month ago, and for the other, he has the get written today. Shmuel says the 3 months begin from the time that the get is written, the date in the get. So according to Rav Oshia, this is going to pose a kasha, because that means what? One of the wives could get married in 3 months, and one of the wives could get married in 2 months. And people are going to look at this and not going to understand why. To which the Gemara says, to which Shmuel responds, Abai responds, Zu Zman Gita Mochi Achala, Vizu Zman Gita Mochi Achala. To which Abai says, I don't understand, it's not a kasha. Remember, Shmuel says that the 3 months begin from the time that you begin to count the 3 months. And when do you begin to count the 3 months? As of the date in the get. So if anybody has a kasha, they'll look at the Gittin and they'll see that one wife, her get is dated a month ago. Another wife, her get is dated today. That's why one of them has to wait another 2 months. One of them has to wait 3 months. It's not such a kasha. Tanya Kavasi de Rav, Tanya Kavasi de Shmuel. So we'll say we have a brisa that supports Rav and a brisa that supports Shmuel. So says the Gemara. What are the brisos say? I'm sorry. Tanya Kavasi de Shmuel, Tanya Kavasi de Rav. I'm sorry. Tanya Kavasi de Rav. So what's the brisa that supports Rav? Hasholeach get. Hasholeach get leishto. V'nishtahe shliya baderech gimel chadashim. So we'll say, so listen to this case. So if a man goes ahead and sends a get to his wife, and the shaliach was delayed for 3 months, what's the halacha? Mishiagia get liada, tzricha lahamten gimel chadashim. When the get arrives in her hand, she has to wait 3 months. In other words, we'll say this. So this supports the position of Rav, because Rav says that the counting of the 3 months begins as of when? Begins as a shas nesina, right? Time that the get is given. Therefore, again, if the shliach ends up getting delayed for 3 months, okay, she waits 3 months from the time that she receives the get. Ule get yashan ein choshishin. I will say we will be introduced to this sugya a little bit later on of get yashan. In a nutshell, look at Rashi. Rashi says get yashan lekaman. Later on, we'll see in Testament days. Tanina the ein adam megarish beget yashan. A man cannot divorce his wife with a get yashan, an old get. What's an old get? These who get yashan, kol shemiyached, kol shenis yached ima me'achar shekasvula, v'tayma shem yom rugita kodim libna, v'shem tisaber v'teled ben ksivasel n'tinaso, u'la'achar zman yom get kodim it was nusnin sabra. So what are we concerned about? That in the event that a man wrote a get and then was alone with his wife, we're concerned that perhaps, again, they were intimate with one another. And here's the issue. If she becomes pregnant, then what could happen? People will go, and let's say they still go through with the divorce, even though she becomes pregnant. People will look back, and they'll look at the date on the get, and they'll look at the timing of the pregnancy, and they'll say that what? She became pregnant after her divorce, which means, now again, it's not adultery, obviously, but that her child was conceived out of wedlock. Now, we'll say, now, remember, from a halachic perspective, that child, there's no label upon a child that is conceived out of wedlock, except that it's not so appropriate, right? It's not the best. It's not the best. What's the word? It's not the best yichus to have, right? So the idea over here is that's called the get yashan. Therefore, Abba said Chazal paskin that if after the writing of a get a man is alone with his wife, yichud, he invalidates that get. And if he wants to go ahead and divorce her, he needs to go ahead and write another get. So the Gemara just says that in this case, where the shaliach was delayed for 3 months on the road, we're not choshesh for get yashan. Why not? Shahari lo nisyachidima. Because I will say the case they were talking about over here is where what? Is where the Maisa there was no yichud. Right? They were never alone with each other. Tanya Kavaz Dishmal. So we'll say, so that's a brisa that supports Rav, that the 3 months are counted from the time that she receives the get. Tanya Kavase de Shmuel. We have a brisa that supports Shmuel. Hamashlish get ishto. If a man goes ahead, we'll say mashlish means that a man gives a get to his wife through a third party. So va'amar lo, but he says to the shaliach, al titnehu lo ela la'achar gimel chadashim. Don't give it to her until after 3 months. Okay, whatever the circumstance, he wants to claim her as a tax deduction. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Whatever the mitzias is. So give it to her after 3 months. So what happens? Mishenasnula, from the time that he gives it to her, muteres linase miyad. She's permitted to get married immediately. So we'll say, what do you see from there? You see from there that the 3 months are counted from when? From the time of the dating, from the writing of the get. Ula get yashan in choshishin. And again, in this case, we are not choshesh for get yashan. Why? Shahari lo nisyached ima. Because again, he was not alone with her. That's the mitzvah. So in this case, there was no yichud. Rav Kana v'Rav Papi v'Rav Ashi avdi mishas ksiva. So Rav Kana, Rav Papi, and Rav Ashi used to paskin like Shmuel that the 3 months, the avchana period, is counted from the time of the writing of the get. V'Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua avdi mishas nesina. And on the other hand, Rav Papa, Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yoshua used to paskin like Rav that the 3 months are counted from the time that the get is given. And I've also how do we paskin? The hilchasa mishas ksiva. And halacha l'maisa says the Gemara that we paskin that the 3 months begins as of the time that the get is written. So I will say, so the Shulchan Aruch, this is in Even HaEzer, Simin Yud Gimel, Sif Aleph writes, Kol Isha shenes garsha o shenes almana, harezu lo tinasiv lo tisares la'achar, at shetamtin tzadik yom. So as I said, that's the halacha l'maisa. A woman has to wait literally 90 days. 90 days from the time that she gets divorced or is widowed, before she's able to go ahead and get married. So just, this is a longer halacha. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, umiyom ksivas haget, momnim lemigureshes. And from the date of the get, the date that the get is written, that's when the clock begins for the 90 days. Va'afilu haya al tanai o shelo hagia liyada ela achar kama shanim miyom ksiva monim share'eno misyachet ima mishakasvula. Now, what's interesting about this is true even if for some reason the get didn't reach her for a long time. But there's a caveat. What's the caveat? The caveat is that there was no yichud between husband and wife from the moment that the get was written. So as long as there's no yichud between husband and from the time that the get was written, i.e. again, it's not a get yashan, as we'll learn about later on, then lamaisa we begin to count the 3 months, or I should say really the 90 days, from the date written on the get itself. That is halacha lamaisa. Itmar. So now the Gemara switches gears a little bit, and this is another fascinating discussion. At what point in time is a ksuva canceled by shmita? As well said, listen to this. So a ksuva, remember, is a debt that is owed by husband and wife. The Gemara is asking, is there a point in time where the ksuva kind of morphs from a debt to a loan? Remember, Shemitah. So let's say a couple is happily married. So obviously, Shemitah doesn't wipe out the wife's ksuva, right? That goes without saying. Why? Because when they're happily married, so that ksuva doesn't. On one hand, it's a debt, but it doesn't really have the status of a loan. So the Gemara is asking, at what point in time is Shemitah mishamet? Is there a point in time where Shemitah would cancel the ksuva? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you, the answer is yes. When Rav Amar, Misha Tifkom V'Tiskov. So Rav says literally, Misha Tifkom, look at Rashi, Misha Tifkam, Rashi says, Shetipara Ktsas, Tegali Daita Deomedes Ligos V'Lifra. Both say, so at the point in time, let's say a couple gets divorced. So remember again, actually, the better case is where a woman is widowed. That's even a better case. Because also remember again, when a couple gets divorced, so husband has to pay off the ksuva. There's no support. There's no other form of support. He pays off the ksuva. When a woman is widowed, so there are circumstances where she gets continuous support from the estate, and actually that support continues until she collects her ksuva. So remember we saw this ksuvas. At the point that she begins to collect her ksuva, then support from the estate ends. So the point that Rav is making over here is when she receives partial payment, that's Misha Tifkam, when she receives a first initial payment of the ksuva, the Tiskaf. Tiskaf, Rashi says, is Alav Hamoser B'milveh, the Nafkali Mishum Ksuva, Umasa Bezin She'enu Mashamet, V'chal Allah Shteim Shtarchol. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. First of all, Rashi points out, why is it in general that a ksuva, that Shemitah doesn't wipe out a ksuva? The reason for that is because a ksuva has the status of what we call a maisa bezdin, right? An enactment of bezdin. And anything belonging to bezdin, Shemitah does not cancel. Remember, that's why we do a pruzbal, right? What do I do with a pruzbal? I have a debt. I would rather Shemitah not cancel my debt. Well, that's impossible because Shemitah cancels all personal debts. But debts that are handed over to Bezdin, Shemitah does not cancel. So Ksuva is a Maisa Bezdin, is an act of Bezdin, therefore Shemitah doesn't cancel it. However, says Rav, the moment that the woman begins to, first of all, that there's an initial collection, that she gets partial payment, and the remainder of the Ksuva then is recategorized as a debt that is owed to her, now it's just morphed from being a Maisa Bezdin to being what? To being what? To being a Chov. To being a debt. Once it morphs into a debt, then what? Then Shemitah would in fact cancel it. Shmuel says, Pagma afapi shelo zakva, zakva afapi shelo pagma. And Shmuel on the other hand says, no, not necessarily. Now remember, also, according to Rav, you need both. You need a partial payment. It's the partial payment that begins this process, and then after the partial payment, the remainder of the debt has to be transformed into an IOU, into a note of indebtedness. Shmuel on the other hand says, no, you don't need both. Rather, either or. Pagma afapisha zakva. Either if she received a partial payment, that partial payment by itself is enough to go ahead and turn it into a regular debt, in which case Shemitah would cancel it. Or zakva afapisha pagma. Or I will say, you understand what zakva means is that ultimately it's transformed into a milva, into a loan. Now, what does that mean? The pashas, what it means is there are terms of payment. So once that's what zakfa means. Zakfa b'milva means that now this is transformed from a ma'isa based into a debt. And when there's a debt, you're going to pay me X amount of dollars every single month, or whatever the arrangement is. Shmuel says either or. Either she receives partial payment, or they create a payment plan for the payment of the ksuva that recategorizes the ksuva from a ma'isa bezdin to a chov, to a debt, and therefore again Shemitah could cancel it. So Tanya Kavasi Rav, Tanya Kavasi Dishmo. So also we have braisos that support both of these approaches. Tanya Kavasi Rav. We have a brisa that supports Rav. Me'imasai ksuva mishametes. At what point in time could Shemitah cancel a ksuva? Mishetifkom v'tiskov. When she receives partial payment, and the remainder is recategorized as a debt. Pagma v'lo zakfa, zakfa lo pagma. But if she only received partial payment, but they did not recategorize the rest of the debt, or they recategorized the debt, but there was no partial payment, eina mishametes achetifkom v'tiskov. Shemitah will not cancel the ksuva until the point that ultimately there's partial payment, as well as a recategorization of the remainder as a debt. Tanya Kavase de Shmuel. So we'll say there is a brisa that supports Shmuel. Ones uknas upitui uksuvas isha. So we'll say ones is the financial penalty if a man violates a besula. Knas is the penalty if a man goes ahead and, this is a husband, claims that his wife was not a besula at the time they got married, but it turns out she really was. And ksuvas isha is ksuvas isha. That's the case of ksuva. In all of these cases, shezakfan b'milva, Rabbi say again, these debts were categorized, or I should say, these obligations, these penalties were imposed as a debt. Mishamtin, the Shemitah cancels them out. Ve'imlav, ein mishamtin, but if not, the Shemitah doesn't cancel them out. Ume'ema sainis kafin b'milva. Rabbi say, at what point in time are these payments considered to be a debt? Mishas hamada bedin. This is interesting. Look at Rashi. No, actually not yet. I'm sorry. No, Mishas Hamadas Bedin, from the time ultimately that Beis Din requires, from the time that Beis Din says that they are chayiv. So we'll say, so this brisa supports Shmuel, because Shmuel essentially says, as long as there's any process, either partial payment or the recategorization of the payment as a debt, either one of those things transforms it into a debt and Shemitah cancels it. The novelty of this particular brisa seems to say at what point in time is something called the debt. The moment that Beis Din orders you to pay it, it now becomes a debt that you owe someone else, and therefore at that point in time, Shemitah will cancel it. Fine. Amar Shmuel. Ksuva kamaisa Beis Din damyo. Shmuel says, so that means machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So Shmuel says, Ksuva kamaisa Beis Din damyo. Ksuva is like a maisa Beis Din. Now what that means is, Rashi says, kamaisa Beis Din, the Tanai Beis Din he. Since Ksuva is something that is required by Beis Din, therefore it has the status of a Maisa Beis Din. Now, both say, now what does that mean, a status of Maisa Beis Din? Remember, one of the ramifications is we just saw that what? If something is a Maisa Beis Din, then what? Then Shemitah doesn't cancel it. That's number one. Number two, Ma Maisa Beis Din nechtam v'nechtam b'alayla, af ksuva nechteves b'yom v'nechtemes b'alayla. Oh, we'll say another ramification is, Maisa Beis Din could be written by day and signed at night. So too, again, a ksuva could be written by day and signed at night. Take a look at Rashi. Ma Maisa Beis Din chiyuve mishum psakdin. Because you must remember, whatever Beis Din does, it's really the essence is adjudication, right? Psakdin. Va'afagav lo ichtim hilchach ein sham hakdama v'nechtama v'nechtama layla. In other words, we both say a concept, a Maisa Beis Din has no issue of shtar mukdam. No issue of shtar mukdam. So it could be written on one day and literally signed on the next calendrical day. Af ksuva, Rashi says, mishas ksiva denichnas alachupa dekiruv chasnusu chal shibud va'akad lo achtim. Oh, Rashi says something fascinating here. Rashi says, now remember, we were speaking about shtar mukdam by get, right? Where you have a get that's written, let's say, during the day, but not signed till that night. So the Mishnah ruled that such a shtar is puzzle, right? It's not kosher. And machlokes Rav and Shmuel as to exactly why that, not Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, as to why exactly that is ramifications of Zman. The Gemara now is suggesting over here that concept doesn't apply to ksuva, meaning that even if a ksuva is written by day, so let's say it has the date of today, but it's not going to be signed until after nightfall, the shtar is kosher. Now, the Gemara says, because it's like a Maisa Beis Din, it's a psak din. Rashi also adds in over here that, remember Rabbi saying, a ksuva becomes effective when the chassan goes ahead and is makabel kinyan. Right? When the chassan does the kinyan, he accepts upon himself the details of the ksuva. A chassan accepts that kinyan from the time that the ksuva is written. Why? Because he's going to be getting married in just a few minutes. He's happy to be meshabet. He's happy to obligate himself in the ksuva now, even though the ksuva won't in fact be dated until later. So because of that, Rabbosai, in essence, it's not a shtar muktam. Why isn't it a shtar muktam according to Rashi? Because he's obligating himself as of when? As of the date that is written in the ksuva, even though what? It's not signed until later. Which Rabbosai, by the way, is very important. Because even though when we do a wedding today, we try, whenever possible, to sign the ksuva on the date written on the ksuva. We try that because we don't like to have shtaros that are written on one day and signed on the next. But nevertheless, if it should happen, that turns out, it's okay. Why is it okay? Because we say to the chassan, you understand that your ksuva is going to be signed as of tomorrow. But are you willing to obligate yourself as of the date that is written in the ksuva? So most times he just says, okay, right? It doesn't, whatever. So we try to really make sure that he actually knows what he's being meshabed himself to. Very, very important that the chassan really has an understanding of it. So as long as he says, okay, the Rebbe said there's no problem of shtar muktam, because he's happy to obligate himself to the obligations of the ksuva from the date written in the shtar, even though at the end of the day, it's not signed until later. To which the Gemara says, so my sebezdin nechtam alayla av ksuva nechtam alayla. So the Gemara says ksuva sid Rabbi Chia barav ichtov ve'echtam alayla. So we'll say the ksuva of Rabbi Chia barav was written by day and not signed until the nighttime. So the Gemara says Rav Hasam. Rav was there, and Rav didn't say anything. Rav didn't object to this. So Lema Kishmuel Kisirle. So we'll say, could it be that Rav holds like Shmuel? And just like Shmuel says that Ksuva is a Maisa Dezin, and therefore even if it's written by day and signed at night, it's okay. To which the Gemara says, no, it was different over there. Why? Asukin ba'ose inyan havu. And we'll say, they were involved in the writing of the Ksuva. Asukin ba'ose inyan, miksiva at chasima afilu b'shar shtaras kasher. So the Gemara says, there's something else that's going on over here. Asukin ba'ose inyan means that they were involved. See, the case over here, the Gemara is saying is, they started when it was day, but they got into discussions about the shtar, and the discussions extended into the night. Disanya Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok lo shanu ela kishein asukin ba'ose inyan, aval asukin ba'ose inyan kasher. Because even Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok said that when do we say a shtar mukdam is not good? When do we say if a shtar is written by day but Sunday night it's not good? That's only Rabbi say when they wrote it by day and then they went on a break, right? They went on a break afterwards. That's when it's not good. But Lamaisa, again, if they began the process by day and they were involved with the shtar until nightfall, everyone will agree that shtar is kosher. Rashi says, Aval asukin ba'ose inyan, kevan she'idim mizumanim lachtom, ela shebal karacham tzrichem lahamtin, ad she'esayim asofer es hashtar, af agav d'yisrael lechasim la'altar kosher, shari mishas ksiva nami isleikala. So in this case over here, the edim, everybody's ready. But they're getting into a sichsuk, they're getting into a discussion about the shtar. They write this sofer wants to, should I write it like this? Should I write it like this? How do I spell this? How do I spell that? So we'll say that kind of case, where therefore the date takes place on the day, but it's not actually signed at night, everyone agrees that case is kosher. So it's a very important yisod. This is called asukin ba'ose inyan. So anytime you have a shtar that was begun by day, even though it's not signed until nightfall, if they were actively involved in the shtar the whole time, everyone will agree that it's not a shtar mukdam, and ultimately the shtar is kosher. The problem comes up when it's written by day, and for whatever reason it's put on the side and then picked up again the next calendrical day. That's when you have the machlokes. Says the Rav Shimon machshir, but yet Rav Shimon was the one who said that a shtar mukdam is kosher. So Amar Rava said, my time to Rav Shimon. Why did Rav Shimon say that a shtar mukdam? Rava says, so again, the case of Rav Shimon was the shtar was written, the get was written by day and not signed until the nighttime. Rav Shimon says it's kosher. What's the reason? My time is Rav Shimon kasavar kevan shenasan einav lagarsha shuvein laperos. Because Rav Shimon is of the opinion that once a man decides to go ahead and divorce his wife, then what? He has no more peros. Therefore, I will say, according to Rav Shimon, again, and obviously we have no way to quantify when the husband decides to divorce his wife. But the one thing we can quantify is what? Is when the shtar was written. So for us, we have no problem. Let him lose the peros, write it when the shtar was written, even though the get doesn't become valid until when? Until it's actually delivered to the woman. But Rav Shimon holds he loses peros from the moment he decides to divorce her. Therefore, shtar muktam is not a problem. Rav Shimon elali alter. Rav Shimon, or even Rav Shimon though says this is only true in the case of where the get was written by day and signed immediately that night. Right? Meaning it's happening on two different calendrical days, but there's an immediacy to it. But I will say, for argument's sake, they wrote the get today, and sometime within the next 10 days they signed it, then even Reb Shimon would agree that such a case does not work. Why? Chayshinan Shema Pies. Because I will say we are concerned that if there's lag time, that what happens? That perhaps the husband and wife made up with each other, and what happened? They were intimate with one another, and she's going to become pregnant. Now, if it turns out again, if it turns out again that he still decides to divorce her, and divorces her with that original document, and of course the problem is, as we said before, it will have the appearance later on that she had this child out of wedlock. So therefore, again, the Gemara is saying over here, actually this is Reish Lakish is saying, that even Reb Shimon, who agrees that a get muktam is okay, only agrees that it's okay if there's an immediacy. So it's written on day one and it's signed mamish on the next day. But if there's lag time, even Reb Shimon will agree you can't use the get because we're choshesh that maybe it's a get yashan. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Afilu mikan v'adasara yamim. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Even if there was lag time for 10 days, meaning it was written today and signed 7 days later, so still Reb Shimon says it's kosher. Why? Em isa depayis kala islay. Because Rabbi say, if indeed husband and wife had reconciled, there would be a call. Kala islay l'milsa. Rabbi say, this is very interesting. So what's the call? Look at Rashi. Kala islay l'milsa. Shashchenim v'ashchenos shomin tagar uketata shebein ish le'ishto v'ka'asher yishkot esrivam hakol margishin. So we'll say, so what happens? So sometimes again the walls are very thin. So what happens? So everybody hears this couple's been fighting. Oh, and suddenly again people hear there's no fighting, it's quiet. So Lamaisa, if indeed they're reconciled, people would know about it. So because people would know about it, then what? Then Lamaisa, again, people would know if ultimately they reconciled. So essentially, Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, you're choshesh that maybe there's some reconciliation that would render the get a get yashan and invalidate it. The truth is, if there's reconciliation, people hear and they know about reconciliation. If you don't hear, you don't know about it, then that's grounds to say that it did not happen. Itmar, Amr Laza. So both say, so you understand now, fundamental machlok is in Rabbi Shimon. So in the Mishnah we established Rabbi Shimon holds that a get muktam is kosher. Now the shayla, the machlokis is around the circumstances of that hechsher. So Reish Lakish says it's kosher as long as the get is signed immediately, again, the next calendrical day, but immediately afterwards. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, even if 10 days go by, no problem. So the Gemara goes weiter. Itmar, Amar la'asar kis v'get le'ishti. If a man says to a group of 10 people, write a get for my wife. So we'll say, so now the interesting part that we have over here is, what does that statement mean? Right? You say to a group of people, write a get for my wife. Obviously, not all 10 are going to write it. So what does that mean? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Shnayim mishum edim v'kulam mishum tanaim. So what Rabbi Yochanan understands that statement to mean, he wants all 10 to sign on the get, but 2 of them have to sign as edim, and the rest as t'nai. T'nai means it's a condition in the get. They're not signing out edus because the edus is already taken care of, but it's part of a t'nai. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shnayim Niskavi Lachtom Lo L'Shem Edim. So 2 of them he wants as Edim. The Kulam, the rest of them are Tanai Lo Hichtim Bo Elo Levaisha Berabim. Utnai Gomer Hitel Beget. Zed De Lo Lahavi Gita Elim Kin Chosma Kulam. Rabbi says, so why would a man say he wants another 8 people signing on the get if only 2 of them are witnesses? To embarrass her. That's what he's looking to publicly shame her. And therefore, again, we'll discuss this case in greater depth. And therefore, he says, "I want 2 of you to sign as witnesses." When he says, "I want the 10 of you to write the get," he means 2 of you sign as witnesses, and the rest of you ultimately again sign as a t'nai in the get. Okay. Reish Lakish Amar Kula Mishum Edim. Reish Lakish says no. When he says, "I want the 10 of you to write a get for my wife," he's saying, "I want all of you to sign as witnesses. All of you to sign b'toras witnesses." So hey Chidam, he first says, "What's the case?" So I will say, if he just said kis v'get le'ishti, so then if he didn't say kulchem, all of you, so v'hatzanan we learned amar la'asara kis v'get le'ishti. We'll see this case. We'll say later on that if a man says to 10 people, write a get for my wife, echad kosev u'shnayim chosim. What he means is from the group of 10, 1 of you write and 2 of you sign as witnesses. So Ela Damarlu Kulchem. Rather, what's the case? The case over here is where he said Kulchem Kisvu Get Leishti. So both sides, you understand the distinction. If you just say to a group of 10 people, Kisvu Get Leishti, write a get for my wife. What he's saying is, from within that group, I want one of you to write and two of you to sign. Okay? But if he says Kulchem Kisvu Get Leishti, all of you write a get for my wife, then what? He's looking to utilize the entire group. And what the Gemara says over here is what he really wants is for all 10 of them to sign on the get. The Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is what are the nature of their signatures. Rabbi Yochanan says only 2 of them are the real witnesses, the rest of them are just the Tanai condition in the get. Reish Lakish says no, all 10 of them are real witnesses. So my Beinayu, what's the practical difference between these shitos? Ika Beinayu, I'll tell you the difference. The Chassan Beit Shrei Minayu B'Yomei, the Enoch Mikan Vadas Hayamim. What's the practical difference? Number 1 is, let's say 2 of them signed on the get on the day that it was written, and the remaining 8 signed in the next couple of days. Mandar Mishum Tanai Kosher. But say if you hold that the reason the husband wanted all of them to sign on the get is just simply a Tanai, not as Eidos. The first 2 are the Eidim, but the rest are just the Tanai, then fine, it doesn't matter if they sign now or in the next couple of days. Mandar Mishum Eidim Pasal. Oh, Rabbi say if you hold that all of them have to sign on the get, why? Als Eidos testimony, then what? Then if you have 2 of them sign today, and the remaining 8 sign over the coming days, then Lemaisa, again, the get will be pasul. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Umandar Mishum Eidim pasul, Telo Havi Eidos Shlema, Achi Chasmu Kulam, because it's not a complete Eidos, ultimately, again, until they all sign, the Chevan de Kulam Lo Chasmu B'Yom Ksiva, so Havali Muktam. And since not all of them signed on the day that the get was written, it's a Shtar Muktam. Inam, another practical difference. Well, it's another interesting nafkamina. Well, let's say it turned out that one of the 10 people was a karav or apostle, was a relative, either a relative to someone else or a relative to the husband himself, or apostle, or just simply was someone who was not fit to go ahead and not fit to serve as an aide. So the mandar mishum tanai kasher. So the truth is, the one who says that all 10 have to sign al tanai, the get will still be kosher. Why will it still be kosher, Bosai? Because remember, all I need are 2 of them to be kosher witnesses, and only 2 of them are real witnesses. The rest are just the tanai. La mandar mishum edim pasul. So Bosai, but again, according to the one who says that all 10 have to sign al edus, then if it turns out that what? That one of them is pasul, then what? It invalidates the entire group of witnesses. Another nafkamina. Ichasam betchila karova pasul. So amrle kasher, amrle pasul. So we'll say, listen to this. What if the first signature on the get itself, or actually it's not, it doesn't have to be the first. Rather, it's one of the first 2. One of the first 2 who signed on the get is a karov, is a relative, either a relative to any of the other signators, or a relative to the husband himself, or the wife herself. So let's say it turned out that one of the first 2 people who signed was a karov or apostle. Some say kasher, some apostle. Some say the get is good, some say the get is not good. Amrle kasher. So we'll say, so if you say that the get is kasher, why? Tinaihu amrila. Because Rabbi say again, if you say that it's kasher, then what? Then that's if you hold Rabbi say that when he says kulchem kisu get leishti, all of them have to sign, but they're not all 10 signing because as witnesses. Rather, they're signing as what? As a condition in the get, and only 2 of them are really to serve as witnesses. Then what? As long as out of the 10 you have 2 who are kasher, we don't care really about the status of the other 8. They have to sign because l'maisa again that is a Tanai. That is a condition ultimately again in the get, but we do not care about their kashrus as witnesses. So the Gemara says, so if you hold Amrle Kasher, Amrle Pasul, Amrle Kasher, Tanaihu, because if you look at Rashi, Rashi says Amrle Kasher, Lemadr Mishum Tanai, Da'afagav Dichtim Bereisha Karol Pasul, Idus Tiskayim Bereuyim Leidus, Voyachshav Veychashav the Tanai. So also listen to this. If you hold that when he says Kolchem Kisu Get Leishti, all 10 have to sign, but all 10 are signing again as a Tanai, as a condition on the get, then what do? We look down those 10 signatures, and as long as what? As long as you have 2 good ones, it doesn't matter if they're at the beginning, the end, middle, interspersed. As long as there are 2 good ones, we're good to go. On the other hand, Amrle Pasal, Asi Lechlufe became Shtaras Da'alma. But on the other hand, the one who says that it's puzzle. The concern over here is what? You may come to confuse this case with a regular case of shtaros. Rashi says, Asi lechlufe b'shtaros ta'ama, t'chivan d'chasam b'reisha, Asi l'meimer zev v'adil l'shem edus chasam, v'yachshiru kar b'chal shtaros. Well, the other opinion says, here's the issue. If the car of a puzzle would have been signature number 3, or signature number 7, or signature number 10, I don't care about it that much. Now, what's the problem? When people look at a shtar, they automatically assume that when you have multiple witnesses, who are the ones who are really affecting the validity, the kashrus of the shtar? The first two. Those are the primary guys. And therefore, the second opinion says we're concerned, even though technically speaking, I may agree with you, that when a man says, Kulchem kisu get lishti, he's really saying only 2 of you need to be valid witnesses. The rest of you are just sending out tonight. If the invalid witnesses are one of the first 2 signatories, the problem, of course, may be that lemaisa, people will confuse this with other cases of shtaros and think that you could use a kar of a puzzle for other cases of shtaros. To which the Gemara says, "Say amar le puzzle asilechlu begim shtaros da alma hahu da amar lehu." So let's just go a little. Actually, what? There's a long daf tomorrow. All right, let me I'll just begin this case and then we'll stop it. Hahu da amar lehu la'asara kisu get leishti. Shabbos says, listen to this. Actually, no, boss, we'll stop over here because we're not going to finish this case. We'll stop over here. We'll pick up with this case tomorrow. Just around. So tomorrow is a schedule. Actually, it's a different schedule. We're going to be learning before davening in Meretz Hashem. So Mesilas Yesharim will be at 6:15. So it's a bonus half hour. It's mamish. So 6:15. Daf Yomi will be at 6:30. First minyan at 7:15 in Meretz Hashem. So we'll continue with this tomorrow. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish.